Thank you for tuning in to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Whether you're listening during your commute, while working out, or just relaxing at home, we appreciate you. Every download, every listen, and every subscription means a lot. Up next, the 12 Kyle podcast.
You can tell by the way that a lot of these internet people move, a lot of them never been punched in the face, because you wouldn't speak as reckless as you do hiding behind a keyboard if somebody had punched you in the face. So speaking as someone who has punched somebody in the face, and I'm not about to sit here and tell you that I'm a tough guy, but I have punched someone in the face and it felt good. And guess what? The person that I punched in the face, never had a beef with him again after that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening. Thank you for downloading. And thank you for subscribing to the latest edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy, 12 Kyle. I want to thank you all for tuning in as you do each and every week. Shout out to those of you who are watching on YouTube as well as Spotify. Man, check this out. On this episode, what I want to talk about is something I saw the other day. I was messing around on the social media app called Threads. And as I was just scrolling the timeline, there was a trending topic talking about Generation X. And in the post that you could see online, there was a lot of discussion about the differences between Generation X and, today's generation. And suffice to say, I am a member of Generation X. Our generation is different. And so what I wanted to talk about on this episode was just not necessarily comparing today versus now, comparing today's generation versus Generation X, but it's really Generation X versus everybody, because we're just cut a little different. I'm not here to say that we are better than other generations, but we just might be. One of the things that stood out to me about our generation was that we did a lot more with less. Being able to do more with less says a lot about you. You got to remember, with Generation X, there was no computers. There was no internet. And most machines didn't help us. I'll give you an example. I remember going into a convenience store and they rang up, my potato chips and juice, and the total came out to let's just say $5.15. And so I had a 20. And so I said, well, hold on a second. And so what I did was I went to the car and I got, 15 cents out of my ashtray. And so I gave them $20.15. And I just remember the kid behind the register was looking around kind of dumbfounded as to why would he give me this money? Because here's the thing. He rang me up for $20, and he didn't realize that I gave him the 15 cents to offset him having to give me change. So, I mean, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that I was due back $15. But the problem was the kid didn't understand that. He was kind of confused. And I just had to tell him hey, it's $15, bro. Just give me my change. And I've done that, not necessarily to stump kids, but just because I don't like a lot of change. I don't carry cash anyway. But it's weird, because what happened was, because he typed on the cash register that it was $20, and he was trying to figure out, why did I give him 15 cents? And he, instead of looking at the machine that would, he couldn't make the calculation in his head that, okay, I would have got $15 back. And so the machine is helping him, because he didn't have to, tally it up himself. He didn't have to write it down and, do long division to figure out what the answer was. But it's just the machines didn't help our generation. Um, a lot of times when we use computers, it was for fun and games. I remember my early memories of an Apple computer. Um, there was a floppy disk, and the floppy disk, it looked really weird, and it was very thin, and you inserted it into the computer, and you got a chance to play a game on it, and it was a lot of fun, and that was my first memories of an Apple computer. And now I do these podcasts on a Apple computer, a MacBook, and but it's technology has changed. But I said all that to say this: like our generation was just different because again, we did more with less. Um, you know, I think a lot of times you will see, particularly this younger generation, and I say this as a father of four. My wife and I always marvel at our fantastic four and how they deal with technology. But if you want to see a young child lose their mind, take the internet off, or just unplug your internet for a few minutes, your Wi-Fi. The kids will go, Dad, there's no Wi-Fi. Whoa, what are we gonna do? Woe is me. What are we gonna do? I mean, again, we grew up, we didn't our generation was the last generation that lived without the internet. So we learned how to do more with less. Um, you know, it's funny because I was talking to the homie Eclectic. Shout out to Eclectic. Check out his podcast, Before Everything Changed. He talks a lot about nostalgia on that particular podcast. In fact, that's what it's based on. We were talking the other day, and I was just like, one of the things that we never said as kids, I'm bored. Those words never came out of our mouth in Generation X. We know why? Because Generation X had to make their own fun. So you made your own fun by doing what every other child did. You went outside. And why did you go outside? Because everything that was happening outside. Um, Another generational difference, and like I said, it's really Generation X versus everybody. Um, we didn't really have a lot of medicine. Now there's literally a pill or a cough syrup or something that you could drink, some type of liquid that will, I don't want to say cure anything, but it basically helps you with any and every ailment that you may have. We didn't really have that in Generation X. I mean, like Generation X, we had Tussin, which is short for Robitussin. And I know it's a common joke, but like, yeah, I mean, like you pretty much took Robitussin for any and everything. If you had a fever, you would take aspirin, or we would call it Tylenol. And I don't know necessarily that I know that there's Bayer and there's Tylenol, but we would always say Tylenol because that was the name brand that we recognized. Um, if you had a headache, you had aspirin, Tylenol. But outside of a headache, I mean, everything else you took Robitussin for. If you had a cough, Robitussin. If you had the flu, Tussin. If you had pneumonia, more Tussin. So, like, Tussin was the thing that was going to make you feel better. And I was talking to the homie King Germ from Pod and Saved Our Marriage. Shout out to Germ and Queen Germ. Their podcast drops every Friday. Me and Germ were talking on the phone the other day, and we were marveling at the fact that both of us, when we were younger, our parents or in his case, I think it was his grandparents, gave us cod liver oil. Now, I know some of you may not have known what that is, or maybe, and if you've never tasted cod liver oil, consider yourself lucky. Generation X, we grew up on cod liver oil. I'm sure there are probably quite a few of you who are listening and laughing and nodding your head in approval. Cod liver oil was pretty nasty. And cod liver oil was always taken like during the wintertime. And it was taken during the wintertime to make you feel better or to quote unquote prevent you from getting sick. I'm not sure how you would take stuff to prevent you from getting sick when the stuff is just downright nasty and awful. And the thing about cod liver oil is once you take it, that taste is in your mouth like for a long time. You can chew bubble gum, you can drink orange juice. It doesn't remove the taste from your mouth. It literally sits on your tongue for a couple of hours. Nasty. But not as nasty as castor oil, which I've had maybe 2 or 3 times in my life. Castor oil is pretty nasty too. Another ailment that they would give you when you were ill. Um, and last but not least, and I've talked about this on my podcast before. I don't even know the name of this thing, but we used to take this medicine called 666. That's right. That's what it was labeled on the bottle. And if you go to my mom's house right now and open up her cabinet, there's still a bottle of 666. This is the most god awful medicine that you would ever want to take in your life. I took that medicine and I almost threw up. And I was sick when I took it, and it was supposed to make me feel better. And it made me feel worse. That is by far it tastes like trash can juice. That stuff. And I don't even know why it was even sold to people. And to my knowledge, it still may be sold in stores. I have no idea. And I still don't understand why my mom still has some in her cabinet, but I'm never, ever drinking that again. But in Generation X, we took medicine like that. Go figure. And last but not least, like anytime you got hurt, you put a Band-Aid on something. Like we had Band-Aids for days. And it wasn't until like later on in life, Band-Aids became a certain color. You could blend the color. You could blend Band-Aids in with your skin color. But no, back when we were coming up, we had the plain old tan Band-Aids, and you would get a Band-Aid from anything from a scratch on your knee to, you could break your arm and they'd put a Band-Aid on you. Now, the Band-Aid's not going to help your arm, but it'll make you feel better. And mysteriously enough, the thing about Generation X kids was that for whatever reason, when we got the Band-Aid put on us, we automatically felt better. So let's just say you're running with your friends and you're running in the street and you fall down and you scrape up the inside of your palm. And, it's pretty bad, right? You go in the house, your mom will put some alcohol, maybe some peroxide on it, and then she would put a Band-Aid on your hand. And you could be crying all of your tears as she is fixing you up to get you to go back outside. Once she put the Band-Aid on, you didn't feel as bad. I don't know why, but Band-Aids literally would stop kids from crying. I don't know if Band-Aids had a certain potion or anything like that, but like I said, we use Band-Aids for everything. And like I said, Generation X, we were the last kids of the outside era. We literally and figuratively spent all of our days outside. Today's kids and the generation that came after us, Generation Y, Generation Z, they were indoor kids because they did things that was indoors. And I don't want you to think that we didn't play inside. We did play inside. We played video games and things like that. But for the most part, we were outside because everything happened outside. We played games like tackle football. We played basketball on the blacktop. Yeah, we really played basketball on the blacktop. See, now you see kids playing basketball. Everybody's in a gym. Everybody's in the air condition. We played in the heat. And when it was hot, it was hot. And when it was cold, it was cold. And we were outside and we just loved it. But we played tackle football. And even in playing tackle football, I always say, like, as someone who played Little League football, and I played football all the way up through college at South Carolina State University, I think my game really developed on the playground. I mean, that's where I learned my moves. That's where I learned how to catch a football. That's where I learned how to catch and fall, because half of football is falling. Most people fall down on the ground every single play. But yeah, that's where my game was developed. I mean, like, I couldn't imagine playing indoors to play football. I mean, no, who does that? We were outside, and like I said, we played. We did everything outside, and we would get on our bikes, we would ride, and even like when I go to my hometown of Florence, South Carolina, sometimes I marvel at how far we would actually ride on our bikes. And it was cool because you were literally on your bike and wherever you went, you came back. And the cool part about it was nobody knew that you were gone. I mean, like your mom knew you were outside. My mom didn't know we rode 5 miles away to the park. But we rode to the park and it was probably dangerous and we could have gotten hit by cars and all kind of stuff like that. But, but we didn't have to worry about, people texting and driving because there were no cell phones. So there was no texting. So you didn't have to worry about that element. But, we did those kind of things and we just really enjoyed being outside. And it's interesting as someone, like I said, I grew up in Florence, South Carolina. It was hot. I mean, like it would be in the summertime, literally 95, 100 degrees every day. And we'd be outside not even caring. Like it didn't matter. I mean, you got your water from the water hose on the side of the house and you might come in the house and eat lunch. But if you came in the house in the summertime, like you literally were in and out. You didn't want to spend a lot of time in the house because some adult might ask you to stay in the house or they might ask you to do a chore or they might ask you just to sit down just because you left the door open and they don't want their good air going outside. What is good air, by the way? We never figured out what that was. But anyway, uh, but yeah, it's different. It was Generation X was just very, very different. The one thing we didn't do was there was no lack of physicality. You ask anybody from Generation X, and 99.9% of the people from our generation are tough. Like, we know what it was like to get punched in the face. See, here's the thing. This generation and, some of the subsequent generations after ours, when life transitioned from being outside to being inside on computers and then subsequently phones, there's a lot of kids who didn't get punched in the face. Most kids from Generation X either punched somebody in the face or got punched in the face. And there's a difference because you move different once you punch somebody in the face. You act different once you punch somebody in the face. You move different if somebody's punched you in the face. But you can tell by the way that a lot of these internet people move, a lot of them never been punched in the face because you wouldn't speak as reckless as you do hiding behind a keyboard if somebody had punched you in the face. So speaking as someone who has punched somebody in the face, and I'm not about to sit here and tell you that I'm a tough guy, but I have punched someone in the face and it felt good. And guess what? The person that I punched in the face never had a beef with him again after that. There's some subtleties to, punching somebody. And that leads to fights. A lot of people from Generation X grew up fighting. They were in fights not because you necessarily had to fight. Some people just like to fight. And some people just enjoyed beating people up. And it wasn't necessarily the bullies, but the thing about our generation, for the most part, you had to draw a line. Like people, you weren't going to let people bully you. You weren't going to let people talk to you any old kind of way. And, some people got beat up. And I have this friend, shout out to the homie Lamont. Lamont and I used to work together. He would ask people at work. He said he had this theory that people lie about getting beat up. So he would always say, he said, "Hey, Kyle, watch this." He said, everybody has a theory about getting beat up because when you ask people if they ever been beaten up before, he said most people lie and say they never were beat up. And so he would ask some of our coworkers, particularly ones that, we didn't talk to that much. He just asked them and see what their response was. And everybody, almost to a man and woman, would either stutter or be like, "No, I never got beat up before." Listen, if you're 45 or 50, 55, there's no shame in saying that Tommy beat you up in the third grade. No shame at all. But yeah, so we would do that. So there's a difference in, getting beat up and having to beat someone up. And like I said, there's a lot of people who talk online as if they've never been punched in the face or been beaten up before. You normally find the people online who do that, it didn't happen, but the ones who went through that era in Generation X, either they can fight and are talking because they ready to go back to that time, or they're trying to talk you out of it because they really will whip your ass. Um, another thing about Generation X, we traveled, we moved around, a lot. We would walk. Like I said, growing up in Florence, we didn't have a bunch of cars, so we had to walk. And you were cool with walking to the store. We would walk. We would get on, as I mentioned earlier, we'd get on our bikes. Sometimes we would just run. I mean, like, I don't see kids run anymore. Not just this generation, but even the previous generations, even like, you know, Generation Z or whoever. Nobody ran. People don't run anymore. I mean, like, when's the last time you saw somebody just sprint? I mean, outside of football or basketball or track meet or something like that, or running from the cops, or running from gunshots. No, people don't run anymore. But I mean, like, we would run to where we wanted to get to, Um, and obviously we would travel by car, and we didn't care. I mean, like, we were that generation that grew up riding in a car and no seatbelt. And I'm talking, your mom could be driving 65 miles an hour, 55 miles an hour, because that was the speed limit in most places. And you're right there in the passenger seat, no seatbelt. It wasn't until maybe the '90s, early '90s, where seatbelts became a thing. I remember when the seatbelt law got passed in South Carolina, and one of my teachers, actually my mentor from high school, Coach Ostrander, shout out to Strand, rest in peace. He made a good point in class one day. He said, "Well, he's like, I don't understand the seatbelt law." He's like, "If I don't have my seatbelt on and I drive into a tree and I get ejected from the car," he's like, "Who did I hurt?" He's like, "I'm not hurting any other pedestrians. I'm only hurting myself." He's like, "Why do I have to put on a seatbelt?" And while I understood his principle in theory, I thought he made a decent point. Now it became the law, and I'll be honest, I remember when the seatbelt law was passed, there was a lot of pushback in the state of South Carolina because people didn't want to have to put their seatbelt on. But like I said, in cars, we were always in cars, and we didn't really care where we sat. Eclectic mentioned on one of his episodes about riding on the hump. That was the elevated part of a back seat, or maybe sometimes the front seat of a car. Um, and as kids, I want to ride on the hump, which sounds real crazy right now, but we just did those kind of things when we didn't care. I mean, like, there's a difference between Generation X and everybody else. Um, Also, over the years, I've heard people complain and really, really talk about participation trophies and being in situations where everybody wins. Um, And that's always been a very touchy subject because there's a segment of society that feels like if a kid participates in a sport, that they should indeed get a trophy for that participation. Um, and then there's Generation Xers who don't believe in that. Like, only winners get trophy, only winners get rings. If you're watching this, I happen to be wearing my college football championship ring from South Carolina State. We were the Black College National Champions in 1994 after defeating Grambling in the Heritage Bowl. And it's a beautiful ring. I don't wear it that often. And it's diamonds for real in it. And like I said, you can see it if you're watching on YouTube and Spotify. But the thing about the ring is that we earned it. It wasn't given to me. We went 10-2 that year because we were the best team in Black college football. I would be pissed off if somebody else could win a ring that particular year because the ring represents what we did on the field. And no, everybody doesn't get a chance to participate and win. Like, the thing about, this climate that we're in now, and even some of the younger generations, everybody wins. Like, everybody's rewarded for something. You have to earn your reward. So I don't believe in giving participation trophies. I don't believe that, when you think of, well, oh, nobody fails. No, yeah, you're supposed to fail if you don't win. Like, even something as simple as school, right? they came with the No Child Left Behind laws. So in theory, kids can't fail school. Like, you can't fail your grades. So if I'm in the 10th grade, and let's say, and we know for a fact that kids have to go to school for 180 days. And let's say I go to school for 100 days and I miss 80 days of school. They still have to pass that kid, which is preposterous to me because when I was coming up, Generation X, you had 10 days that you could miss. And if you missed more than 10 days of school, you weren't going to pass that grade. That was an automatic F because you weren't there. I mean, unless you had some type of medical issue or something like that and you missed a bunch of days. But no, if you missed 50 days of school, no, you ain't passing. You're going to repeat that grade. And so, like, the idea of kids not even, I mean, I have a friend who is a teacher, and there was one year where he had a kid that missed like 40 or 50 days of school. And when he did come to class, he spent most of the class with his head down on his desk going to sleep. And so, like, it got to a point where he's not teaching him, but he had to pass the kid in the class. He had to pass the kid in his class, which is crazy to me. Back in our day, Generation X, you get an F. You get a big fat F. But, it's a different day and time. One of the things that I love about Generation X is that, for the most part, we paid our dues. What we got is what we earned. You weren't just handed something. And I think that's one of the great things about this generation is that Generation Xers always paid their dues. And they understood the premise that nothing happens overnight. Like, you eat what you kill. If you don't kill anything, you're not going to eat anything. And if it happens fast, it'll leave you fast. That's an old saying. There was a time where you had to build to get to where you wanted to go. And then you got the satisfaction of the journey that you had. And you also had the ultimate satisfaction of accomplishing and being rewarded for what it is that you earned. The generations that preceded us, and the generations that came after us were different generations. The generations that came after us, a lot of them, they wanted overnight success, and it doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen fast. It's supposed to take time because that's just how life is. Now, if something happens and it pops off, and more power to you, but I think there's a level of appreciation that you have for things when you see the growth and you go through what you need to go through to get to that point. I don't know necessarily that the subsequent generations after us went through a lot. And I'm not saying that they didn't go through a lot. I want to be clear when I say that. But you appreciate it if you had a struggle or you had a process to go through to get to where you're trying to go. If you went from 1 to 0, if you went from 0 to 10 and 10 was where you needed to be and you did it in a minute, it's not going to be the same. I don't think your appreciation is going to be the same. And last but not least, I mean, like, Generation X, we had a lot of respect for our elders. If you know anybody who's from Generation X, they will greet their elders with Mr., Mrs., Miss, because we came up in an era where we were told a child was to be seen and not heard. You don't talk back to grown people, and you don't talk when grown folks are talking. You stayed in a child's place, and you always respected the elders. I mean, like, even when we got to the age of the time where we felt comfortable enough to cuss, and I noticed I didn't say curse. I said cuss. I'm from South Carolina. If you happen to cuss and there was some adult within a vicinity of you cussing, you would say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Miss Jones." You understood that, like, it was disrespectful for you. One, you knew you weren't supposed to be cussing, but two, you understood that, okay, if I cuss, I'm at least not going to cuss around adults. mm, these generations that came after Generation X weren't built like that. They weren't built like that. I can't tell you how many times I was around younger people and they would just cuss like I wasn't even there. Like, and like they gonna get this shit off real quick. And I think that's a level of respect. That's a level of embarrassment. I mean, you should be mindful about what you say publicly, particularly around your elders. Um, but no, I mean, as the old folks used to tell us, you better have some manners. And maybe it's because I grew up in the South. Maybe it's because, we just were raised a certain way. You just could certain things you just couldn't say. Again, I will still say ma'am. Like, if I'm opening the door for a woman that's older than me, if she says thank you, I say yes, ma'am. Like that. I mean, like that's just it's just respect. And I'm old. I'm 53. If I'm opening the door for an 83-year-old woman, she's 30 years my senior. I'm going to show her a level of respect. And like I said, you couldn't talk back. Talking back to grown people for Generation X would get us slapped in them. You could get slapped from an adult that wasn't your mom and dad or family member just for talking back. You don't talk back. You take whatever it is they say and you walk away or what have you, but you're never disrespectful. In conclusion, there's a lot of differences between Generation X and everybody else. Again, I'm not saying that we're the best, but we just might be. And I'm okay with that. This generation's been through a lot. We've seen a lot. And we have a lot of stories to tell. And sometimes it's kind of weird because you don't have the documentation to show it. But, it's just like when I tell people about Freaknik and my visits to Freaknik. It's cool that I don't have anything to show you from Freaknik. But if you were there, you were there and you understood. And people in my generation, we live by those type of creeds. Like we understand that sometimes you just had to be there, and that's cool if you weren't. But we want to make sure that everything is preserved up here, up top in our brain. And like I said, Generation X was just definitely cut from a different cloth, and we're not going to apologize for that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast. We drop new episodes every Thursday. Also, if you'd like to purchase merch, we have 12 Kyle podcast merch. Just look in the description box. There you can find a link that says merchandise. Click that link and you can buy 12 Kyle podcast t-shirts, hoodies, as well as coffee mugs. We got it for the low. That's going to do it for me. Thanks again for checking out this edition of the 12 Kyle podcast. I am your boy 12 Kyle. We'll catch you next time. 5,000. Cheers.
Thanks again for listening to this episode of the 12 Kyle podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure that you hit the subscribe button and share this podcast with a friend who needs the 12 Kyle podcast in their life. Every listen, every download, and every share helps us grow. Thanks for being a part of the 12 Kyle podcast community. We appreciate your support. We will catch you next time. 5,000.